So, hi, my name's Susan, and today we're exploring what is calmness. So, when I explored and did research around what different people with expertise in the field talk about, what they say is calmness is from both a physiological and a psychological state. Doesn't that make sense? It feels true. So, another way to say it in the Eastern practices is a mind-body connection. So when we notice that we're off, one of you used the phrase or the word centeredness, or taking it off our cushion with us into our daily lives. So that sense of integration and how we reset back to that sense of centeredness is what the focus of calmness is about. When we're agitated, anxious, or depressed, we have hyperarousal, that kind of whirling anxiety. We have hypoarousal, that flat affect of depression. And these are when we're talking about mild or moderate mental health rather than serious mental illness, which is a different brain symptom, right? So we're talking about mild or moderate mental health if we experience that kind of rushing anxiety. And of course, we live in a culture where the drivenness, the hyper alertness is all part of it. And as I'm exploring through The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, his new book, he's linking up our disconnect in the mind body directly to our socioeconomic system, which some of us here already know. Back to the personal, though, the nervous system requires what in order to feel calm? It requires a very simple primary ingredient, which is safety. And those of us who know Maslow's hierarchy of needs know that safety is the primary foundation of which all other things come. We can't actualize or meditate if we're in a position of being unsafe. That can be externalized in terms of our physical safety, and it can be, of course, emotional safety. But even if it's not real externally, we can still perceive it as that. So when we don't feel safe, our bodies, physiological, get ready to defend ourselves. We become vigilant, looking for threats, real or imagined. They still experience it internally very similarly. So being not self, feel threatened, it creates a ripple or domino effect in our bodies and in our minds. So most of you have heard me talk about 60,000 years ago, our ancestors who lived short, brutal lives on the whole, needed to have that hardwired vigilance in order to stay alive. And if they didn't have that hardwired, where's the threat? Where's the, then they didn't live. And so genetically, we developed in our brains and in our bodies and in our minds the capacity to be alert and to see threats. So nowadays, we're under less threat, except let's remember COVID. So 2.5 years ago in March 2020, we were given notice that we were under direct threat from an invisible virus that could kill apparently randomly. We had to build our vigilance every time we stepped out the door, and anytime us or any of our friends or families came close to us, we went on to vigilance. Now, it might have not been the same threat as our ancestors 60,000 years ago experienced on the African savannah, where a lion would come roaring towards you. But nonetheless, this invisible virus created a high level of hypervigilance in us. And in those early days, you might remember even going grocery shopping. When we came home, we were suggested to wash down the bags, wash down the groceries. Some of us did that, some of us didn't. But certainly our hands, the masking, all of those things created a vigilance societally. And we found ways to respond to it. Vaccines, masking, protecting ourselves. There's still a residual of that in our culture, though. Despite 92% of Canadians being vaccinated, there's still people who are dying from that. So perception of safety, real fear, real threats. Nonetheless, the cost of this kind of vigilance is the opposite of calm. It's exhausting and it can be corrosive both physically, right? People dying from other things in the process, and emotionally and mentally. So, how do we continually, whether it's something extreme like a direct global risk of COVID or your own personal life, how do we take what's occurring to us outside and increase our capacity to return to our center, as one of you said, to return to a state of calmness? How much choice do we have? And I think most of you have heard me talk about, once the vigilance is whacked up to the next level, where we're in the alarmed state, the central nervous system reacts unconsciously. We don't have a choice. Once the hormones of, the adrenaline, the cortisol starts into our bloodstream, we don't have a choice at that point. And we need that sometimes when we're in high risk situations. But mostly day to day, we are not. So how do we continue to re-educate our brain on what is a real threat, re-educate our central nervous system so it mostly comes from calmness? So this is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about now. So calmness is a skill, and it's based on lots of research now. And it helps us, by learning that skill, to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, because despite what seems like it should be calm, the sympathetic nervous system, there's two components of the autonomic nervous system, or the central nervous system, and the sympathetic is the one that gets kind of, alert when there's safety. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the part that calms us down. So what we want to do is build small steps over time, which is why we're all here. Because if we wait until we're in direct threat, it's much harder to draw on those. I came across a quote in my research, and Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence is not an act, but a habit. So when we think about change the word excellence to calmness, is not an act, but a habit, by doing specific steps. So when I looked at what some of the key experts in the field are talking about, almost all of them land on the one thing that we keep talking about here, and that we're going to do our longer meditation on, which is breathing. It's the most universal act, and it's the most well-researched. Deep and constant breathing that allows you to calm the body and the mind. What we do know is that it's also free. So you don't have to pay anyone to figure it out. You just get to keep drawing on this breath. And as you're hearing me speak, just notice, is my breathing calm? Am I consciously using my breathing as a tool to allow me to be more present? One of you talked about this morning going to exercise and then feeling that sense of hurrying, and then reminding yourself, oh, right, I don't have to hurry. I don't have to hurry. Hurrying is the second one, because hurrying is what our culture has designed in us. And this is where Gabriel Mate's work comes in terms of looking at the drive to make more money, to have more possessions, and that we can choose to live a simpler life and come back to a more constance, that we don't need to be driven in that way. Even if we're still working full-time, however, at a demanding job, we can still use our tools to breathe and to bring ourselves back to calm down. Now, you will probably guess what is the third top key around calmness in the research. And it's the whole thing about eating regular meals, exercising often, and connecting with community. Those three things are number 3 around using your practical self. Without regular exercise, it's much more challenging. And if you skip meals, so your heart rate is up, or if you overeat, so you're sluggish, or if you eat too much sugar or processed foods, we know these foundations of wellness are important. And then, of course, what they talk about is the key factor of happiness worldwide. You know, that happiness report that comes out now once a year. I think it's McLean's or Time or something that says what are the happiest countries in the world and what are the key ingredients of happiness. That's about connecting socially. So whether you live in the slums of Mumbai, because many of us here have much more sort of choice and privilege of living, lives with access to water and toilets and good food. So when we remember those key elements, that social isolation is a really significant factor. So the other thing that comes up in the top few is being self-compassionate. And I know all of you here, myself included, works continually in a lighthearted way around, oh yeah, we make mistakes, we be kind to ourselves, and we be mindful. When we catch ourselves in self-criticism because of a mistake or so-called failure, we can let that fall away, right? We can just remember, oh, right, I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. That's the nature of being human. And it's a denial of reality as it is to say that I'm not going to make mistakes. So when I make a mistake and then I beat myself up, it's an implied denial of reality. So I'm going to sort of give the last couple, and I've got this in a handout if you're interested. Harvard cardiologist Herbert Benson, who is the author of The Relaxation Response, suggests that knitting lowers heart rate, blood pressure, and stress. And what he does is he implies from that your hobby or hands-on work of any kind can contribute to your calm, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? And we're going to finish, although there's a few more, but I think that's enough for now. And all of you will know this, detaching from our social media when we can, taking breaks from them, turning them off for a day here and there, or an afternoon, or whatever you can do. That allows us to calm our minds because we're hardwired, as those of you have seen the Netflix thing of, I gotta remember what it's called, the whole social media thing, how hardwired they are. They're using all the psychology to hook us into those little sounds where we're, those little tiny flicks. It might not lose your sense of safety, but you're flicked when you hear the texts come in, that little, oh, I have to get to that. So it can interrupt. So learning how to turn your phone off, airplane mode, how to shut it down so that it gives your whole nervous system, mind, body, a rest. So finding ways to rest. So I'm going to finish with that and leave the rest. And anyone who wants to, please let me know if you want the handout. And I'm going to